Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is Dr. William Schnoebelen coming to you with another teaching from With One Accord Ministries. And tonight we are going to talk about issues concerning finding the right sort of congregation or church to attend. And by way of starting, we need to remember one important verse that Yahuwah told us right back in the Sermon on the Mount at the beginning of his ministry. He talked about the idea of, popularity versus truth. And he did warn us, in this Matthew 7:14, he said, because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. And it is our prayer that everything we do here at With One Accord Ministries and on this channel will be to that end, to help you find the straight, the narrow path. Amen. Okay, let's get into this. Probably at least half of the emails and questions we get from people are regarding where do I find a decent church? Where do I find a congregation? Is there somebody around in this area? And, we try to help with that. But quite frankly, there's a lot of areas, even in America, which is a highly churched country, that really there's not a lot to be found. And let me just run you through some scenarios here. Many people, perhaps they've been in a church for years, and they like it. I mean, socially it seems good. It may have good programs for, their children or whatever. But upon encountering some of the materials we have, maybe they've discovered that there's Freemasonry in the church, that the pastor is a Freemason or the elders are Freemasons or something of that nature. That's a big concern. And of course, we have always advised people in that situation to try and remedy it, but if it can't be remedied, that then they need to find another church. The other problem that can be is if the church is too ecumenical, if they start cozying up to Rome or to the Mormons. Like, for example, recently I found out that the Southern Baptist Church is now recognizing the Mormon Church as a Christian church, which they are not. They're no more a Christian church than is the, Baha'i Center, that you might have in your neighborhood if you live in a big city. They're not a Christian organization. They're a pagan, Gnostic-based organization. In a similar vein, these people might be teaching weird doctrines, the leadership. They might be teaching, holy laughter, or they might be teaching, various kinds of, there's all sorts. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't just have to be charismatics. They're in the fundamentalist wing. There's all sorts of strange ideas. The Baptist bride thing and all of this, and almost everywhere you go, or there's issues about, salvation, how to be saved. And, these are critical issues. And if the church you're in isn't doing the right thing by you in regard to how they teach and what they promote as doctrine, I mean, look at the statement of faith. Very important. Okay, another thing is that sometimes, rarely, but not as rarely as we would hope, leadership is involved in sexual sin. The pastor's in adultery, or maybe he's fallen into homosexuality, or the other leaders, the deacon. I mean, one guy told me he and his family that they found out that the deacon who would be going around passing out, communion in the church, was actually committing adultery, and nobody did anything about it. They tried to talk, to the pastor, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it, probably because this guy was wealthy and he was tiptoeing through the tithers. But this kind of stuff, you don't want to be in a church where leadership is involved in sexual immorality, pornography, gambling, any kind of addictive behavior like that. Then there's the whole issue of, is the pastor and the leadership of the church following the Torahless one? What do I mean by that? Well, that's what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 2, the mystery of iniquity. Are they following that? Are they walking away from Torah? Are they telling people, oh, you don't have to keep the commandments, just trust in Jesus, quote unquote, and you'll be saved. Just go and pray the prayer and you'll be saved. And you can, most churches won't say that you can go out and do whatever you want. They won't say that. But yet the idea is that we don't have to worry about keeping the feasts of Yahuwah. We don't have to worry about the Sabbath. We don't have to worry. All these things are Old Testament stuff. And the Old Testament is done away with. That is following the Torahless one, the anti-Messiah spirit. Because that is what, when he finally comes, the beast, the Antichrist, anti-Messiah, whatever you want to call him, he will be the Torahless one. And you don't want to be following a mini Antichrist in your church. You just don't. So if you're being taught that kind of sloppy, greasy, agape grace stuff, you need to get out of that church. And people are realizing this. People are understanding this, but then they say, well, where do I go? What do I do? And sometimes they can't find any kind of a decent church nearby. I mean, if you live in a smaller community, sometimes all you can find is either the Masonic Lodge or a Catholic church or some, spiritually dead mainline Protestant church. And, then there are also people who live in other countries because we have an international ministry. Our materials are seen all over the world. And in places like Europe and other countries, where, I don't mean to pick on Europe, but the place has grown very secular. And it's very hard to find good churches there. And what do? Then there are people who've been abused in a church. People have been emotionally abused. They've been called out by the pastor and yelled at in front of the whole church. Maybe they'd have been manipulated by the pastor in some way that was totally out of order. Perhaps they've even, Yahuwah forbid, they've even been sexually abused or even physically abused in a church. There are churches that I remember dealing with where the leadership, if you misbehaved, you'd have to go up to the front of the church. If you were caught in sin, you'd confess the sin in front of the whole church, and then they would whip you. They would spank you, if you even an adult. I mean, this stuff is nuts. But yet, there are churches that do this kind of thing. And if you've been through that, you are going to be very careful about going to another church, understandably so. Then, there are a lot of people we've talked to and that call us and whatnot who've received what I call a left-footed fellowship. They've basically been asked to leave the church. With all charity and Christian love, of course, but they've been asked to leave the church because they're teaching about things they talk about with other church members, things like the need for deliverance. That's another big thing. Many churches don't want to hear about demons. No, there's no demons. No demons around here. No. And so if you start talking about deliverance, or if you start talking about the Torah, or if you start talking about the importance of being modest, in your attire, things like that, boy, a lot of churches, they'll just ask you very nicely to just, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And that's what I call a left-footed fellowship. Because it's too bad, I know I saw a thing a year ago on a meme where it showed Yahushua sitting on the door of a church step, and there was a guy next to him sitting there, just a regular young man, and he says, "They won't let me into the church because I have long hair." And Yahushua says, "Don't feel bad. I haven't been able to get into that church for 20 years. So, it's funny, but it's also tragic. Because the church, most people think, okay, this is what Yahushua is all about. And what if the church is presenting a totally false image? So, and of course, we also have these various giant churches like, Joel Osteen and Rick Warren, which are teaching just stuff that's only vaguely Christian. It's much more at home in the New Age. And I talk about that more in our new DVD, CHURCHCRAFT, and you can go and look that up on our website. But so here's the problem. I mean, more and more, increasingly, people are finding a hard time to find a church that's actually scriptural. What do? Well, here's the thing. Obviously, It's the adversary's job to keep us isolated. He wants us to feel alone, to feel lonely. But I would put a question to you. What is worse in a person's life, a believer's walk, to have bad headship or no headship? I would say bad headship is worse. Because let me tell you something. I mean, we talk a lot about headship in our ministry and our teachings, and it is important. But it's also important to understand that Yahuwah ultimately is our head. I mean, he is our headship. Yeah, it's nice to have a pastor or a rabbi or whatever, they might want to call themselves, a congregational leader, an overseer. That's good if the man or woman is walking in Yahuwah. But if they're not, then it's really worse, because then all of the spiritual junk that person is accumulating in their lives is going to trickle down onto the congregation. And it's kind of like having a wolf run the flock. It's just not good. So we need to remember that that it's impossible. It is impossible for a believer to have no headship as long as they understand that Yahuwah is their head and that he is our master. He is our shepherd. That's what the word pastor comes from. It comes from a Latin derivation of the word shepherd. So, Yahuwah is the good shepherd and he is our head. And if you are alone, if you feel isolated, you need to ask him to be your headship. Remember, you are part of the bride of Moshiach, of the bride of Christ. And that is a precious truth. You are part of a covenant family. You're part of the body. And you can never lose that relationship as far as he is concerned. So it's important to remember that if you are in a church where things aren't right for any of the reasons I mentioned earlier, it is better for you to leave than to be exposed to that. Now, some people might say, oh, well, I have teenagers, I have young people, the guy that runs the children's church is really good, the youth group is really good. Well, that may be. But realize that young people, your children, are especially sensitive to spiritual influences, even if it's not obvious. Even if the Sunday school teacher or the children's church teacher isn't running around wearing a witch hat and teaching them how to cast spells like Harry Potter, don't laugh. That was being done in vacation Bible schools. They were running around doing Harry Potter things in vacation Bible schools and having the kids go out in the woods and make wands. I mean, this stuff was happening back when Harry Potter was huge. And of course, now it's coming back because they have a new spin-off book and movie. But the point is, it's better to have your children not be in a church than to be in a church where creepy things are going on. And they might be subtle. They might not be obvious things like I was just mentioning. They might be something like the fact that somebody, maybe the Sunday school teacher or the children's church teacher, is involved in some sort of sin. You never know. And you need to be prayerful and careful, because your children are precious, precious treasures that you've been given by Heavenly Father. And you need to be sure you're not allowing wolves to devour them when they go to church on Sunday, which it should actually not be Sunday, but that's another discussion. Okay, that being said, what is the Torah model? Well, see, we have been kind of sold a bill of goods from the Roman Church again. This idea that, you've got to go to church every Sunday. Where is that? Doesn't say that in the scriptures. What is the Torah model? It says very clearly what we are required to do is gather with other members of the covenant family 3 times a year, not 3 times a week. I mean, many evangelical and fundamental type churches have a Sunday morning service, a Sunday evening service, and a Wednesday night service. Where is that in the Bible? I'm not saying it's evil, although really the problem is Sunday is a day that's sacred to the Sun, S-U-N, God, not to the Son, S-O-N. So you shouldn't really be making that a holy day. It's not. It hasn't been ever. The seventh day is the Shabbat, the Sabbath. That's when you should be worshiping. But beyond that, meeting more than once a week is okay if that's what the congregation wants to do. But the problem is people guilt Christians or followers of Yahushua, however you want to call them, into saying, oh, if you don't go to church 2 or 3 times a week, then you're violating Hebrews 10:25, blah, blah, blah. No, you're not. That's not what the scripture is talking about. Hebrews 10:25 says that we are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, that is talking about the Moedim, the feasts, the 3 times a year that Yahuwah is set up as appointments with him. And, that's what's important, not to do it every week. And so, don't feel like you're somehow backsliding if you haven't gone to a Wednesday night church service in a while, because that doesn't make you set apart, believe me. Ideally it should, but again, if you're gathering together with people that aren't very set apart, that have goofy doctrines, that are Freemasons or gamblers or whatever, it's just not a good situation. The point is that passage in Hebrews 10:25 doesn't say do it 3 times a week. And consider the context, friends. Consider to whom it was written. What is it called? Epistle to the Hebrews. What do you suppose the Hebrews were? Well, they were Israelites that believed in Yahushua. Do you think they were meeting on Sunday and Sunday evening and Wednesday night? No, they weren't. They were keeping the feast, the Moedim of Yahuwah, and they may or may not have also been getting together on Shabbat. And the Shabbat gathering is a nice idea, but it really is not mandated. You don't see that mandated in the scriptures anywhere. Okay. So, it is very obvious by the time of Yahushua that people would gather on Shabbat to discuss Torah, to read from the prophets and the Psalms and worship and so on. And if you look in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, as I prefer to call it, the Hebrew word, the renewed covenant, it had home meetings. That was what was going on. There were no big cathedrals. There were no churches in the sense that we know them. Now, people might say, oh, well, that's because they were persecuted. Well, that was true on and off in the Holy Land. But really, it was more just there are real advantages to that. And people today make the mistake of thinking, oh, I've got to go to a church. Well, no, you don't. You can have the church at home. You really can. It doesn't say you can't do that anywhere in the scriptures. And there are advantages to a home fellowship group. For example, it's more economical. You don't have to raise a bunch of money to build some structure. Even if it isn't a fancy structure, it's still going to cost money. Then it's more personal. You can only get, at most maybe a couple dozen people into a typical person's home. And that means it's more intimate. People get to know each other. They can bear one another's burdens. They can pray together. It's not like, you go into some of these churches, like I went to a church for a while. It was, 5,000 members, a Pentecostal church in the Pacific Northwest, and nobody hardly knew anybody. They did make an effort to have little cell groups, but still, it's just not the same thing as what I'm describing, where just a bunch of people gather together in a voluntary association of love for Yahuwah and love for Torah. Also, the resources that might have been used to build a building, to pave a parking lot, to, all this stuff, can instead be used to help less fortunate members. Because that's what the ecclesia, the congregation, should be doing. It should be helping those that are less fortunate, both out in the community, but especially within the local community. Now, if there are no good churches in your area, no home meetings that you can find out about, pray about starting one yourself. Now you might say, that's scary. I don't think I could do that. Well, why not? Let me tell you something. If you are a follower of this ministry, you probably know the Bible better than most pastors that have been through 4 years of seminary training or Bible college or whatever. You probably do, because they were taught a bunch of dispensational fluff that came out of the Torahless one, out of the Antichrist system that originated in Rome, even though it's been kind of, a couple of generations removed from that, so to speak. It's still got the leaven in it. So you might actually do better than some pastor would. Pray and ask for the help of the Ruach HaKodesh. You will get enormous help from, our Father and the Ruach. It's a great way to learn the scriptures, to know that, okay, every Shabbat or every other Shabbat or whatever it might be, I need to put together a message. And plus, the other thing you can do is you can just work your way through the Torah readings that are part of traditional Judaism, where they basically go through the 5 books of the Torah every year. And that's a very helpful thing to do too. Now, here's the other thing. We, as a ministry, with one accord, we try to provide lots of resources on a wide variety of topics. And you can feel free, if you're trying to start a local home fellowship, you can use some of these resources. You can, watch YouTube videos that we have. You can download. We have all these free teachings, straight talks, what have you, prayers. You could really equip the people that are coming to hear you teach and to worship Yahuwah really very well with what we have on our website. And people say, okay, well, what about young people? If you have a home church, there probably aren't going to be that many young people. Well, let me just say this. I know that increasingly believers are taking the time to homeschool their children. That's really what I would do if I had, children of that age in this day and age. Because frankly, the public school systems and even most Christian churches are way out of line. Way out of line. And so you will find within the homeschool movement, which is substantial among conservative Christians and others who just care about what their children are being taught, that they have sports groups that get together. They have leagues where they play basketball or baseball or whatever it might be. They have get-togethers that are informal, and it's a way that the children can still socialize. And even if everybody you're playing basketball, you're not discussing doctrine, for heaven's sake. So, you need to be wary, but it's a lot easier to do that than to deal with a whole giant church where you've got, children's church and youth group and whatnot, where you're not really sure sometimes what these people are teaching your children. So I would just say that, yes, it's important for kids to have socialization. Yes, it's important for you to have friends their own age. But I would submit to you that there's an increasing thing in most communities of any size of homeschooled groups that get together and meet, and they try to create, things like I've been mentioning, volleyball or basketball or baseball or whatever, that their young people can play at all ages and interact with other kids. They can have, pizza parties. They can have, stuff like that where all these young people can get together. And it's really a very worthwhile thing. But this is something you need to pray about because, again, as I said, these young people from, preschool all the way up to college age, they're your responsibility, and you need to seek Ruach, the set-apart spirit, about how you should deal with this issue. Now, another thing, as we're getting to close here, what about if you're single? What about if you're widowed? With nobody around. I mean, you don't have children. You don't have family anymore, and that could be either because they've all passed away or it could be because of family issues. But this is difficult, but there are solutions. We try to do what I've been discussing. We try to offer a lot of materials, but there are groups that are focused in a different direction and do more. There are online groups which offer teaching, videos, online fellowship. Groups like Rob Skiba and Steve Mutria, 119 Ministries. Now you see TV, and there are others. And we're going to try and put together a resource list and put it on our website. But those are some good ones. We don't necessarily agree with absolutely everything those folks teach, and they don't agree with everything we teach. But by and large, they keep Torah, they keep the feast, and they're faithful people that really have the heart of a shepherd to lead people and to teach the scriptures the way they should be taught, not the way they're mostly being taught today. And again, feel free to contact us if you have a prayer need, if you have a concern. Call us, email us, message us on Facebook until they kick us off or whatever. So, that would be good too. Beyond that, take the opportunity to use your solitude to immerse yourself in Yahushua and in the scriptures. All great men and women of Yahuwah had time alone. Moshe spent 40 years in the wilderness. And some of that time, of course, he met Zipporah and married and all of that. But, for a long time, he was single. And he was alone in the desert. And there's all sorts of examples of that down through the history of the faith. Yahuwah can meet us in our solitude. And he can fill our solitude with light and love and his truth. Seek his face continually. That's what he wants. A person, maybe it's a retired person, a widow or a widower, or whatever it might be, and you have time on your hands. Use that time to press into Yahushua, to press into the Father, to press into the Ruach. Pray frequently in the Ruach. Remember the thing I say in a lot of my teachings. Try and tithe your time to pray for an hour and a half, more or less, a day. If you did that, you would be an awesome, awesome spiritual force in your community and in the nation. A lot of people who have kids are out there in the community running around, taking the kids to this, that, and the other thing, they don't have time. But you could do that. You could stand in the gap for your city, your state, and your community, and it would give you meaning. Because that's what many people struggle with, that are alone. They feel like their life has no meaning. And I understand that. It's an important thing. But you've got to realize every one of you has been called and anointed by Yahuwah for a purpose. And the trick is, the more you get into Yahushua and his truth, the more you're going to find out what that purpose is. So, as I said, pray frequently in the Ruach, because I will tell you this. There is no human need that Yahushua cannot meet, because he is both man and he is also Yahuwah. Okay, remember, in all of this, I'm talking again to these people that are lonely, you are a child of Yahuwah, and you have the right to come to him when you are feeling alone, when you are feeling needy, and tell him, Abba, I need a spiritual hug. I need you to shower me with your love and your presence right now. Please, Father. And after a while, you will begin to feel it. He will. He will do that for you because he cares about you. Even if you feel like nobody else in the world cares about you, he careth for you. Peter tells us that. Remember, you are part of an eternal covenant family that spans the globe. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it's not as large as many Christians would believe. People like, there's millions and millions and millions of Christians. Well, no, they're really not, because the vast majority of believers wouldn't know Yahushua from a doorknob. They don't know the Bible. They don't know what he expects of them. And they don't know good, sound doctrine. And I'm not judging them, but I'm just saying that he said, narrow is the way, and few there be that find it. And I'm glad that you are finding it. Rejoice in that. Focus on your present moment with him and your future with him, and instead of past losses or past hurts, because we've all had them. Many of us that have lived any length of time have lost relatives, have lost friends. We've been through things, but we can't focus on that. We've got to forget the things that are behind and press forward into the mark of the high calling of Yahushua. We are to focus on how great and how loving Abba really is. Because I know for some people that are feeling isolated, it seems like an insurmountable problem. But no problem is too great that Yahushua cannot solve it. You've got to just remember that if your problems are so big, it's because your view of the Almighty is just too small. And I know that's kind of a truism, but there is profound truth in it. And you need to remember that because He loves you. He cares for you, but sometimes we can get so embroiled in our own stuff that He's standing there knocking at the door trying to get in and love us. And we're so immersed in feeling sorry for ourselves, we don't hear the knock. And it's in solitude that that knock comes. It's in stillness that that knock comes. It's the still small voice. And we need to be quiet and listen and wait for that voice to come. We're going to have more teaching on it later on, but for now, I think we've given you some concrete things, so I don't want to make this too long. But just remember, focus on Him, focus on His truth, His love, the Scriptures, and He will be with you. As He said, Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. Hallelujah. May you be blessed. And remember, if you found this helpful, to please subscribe and share and pray about supporting our ministry. Thank you so much. And shalom, shalom.